They did not come to invade. That was the part humanity never quite recovered from, the realization that the Kaveth did not come to destroy Earth. They came to do something far more humiliating. They came to throw something away. The ship arrived on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. No fleet formation, no siege of orbital platforms, no ultimatum broadcast across every radio frequency. It simply appeared at the edge of the solar system, broadcast a short-range identification signal in the common interstellar trade language that humanity had spent 60 years learning from intercepted transmissions, and began moving toward Earth at a comfortable sublight cruise. The identification signal, when the language department at the Interstellar Affairs Bureau finally decoded it in full, translated to something like decommissioned vessel, category, disposal, destination, Earth, classification, charitable transfer. Secretary General Amara Diallo was in her office in Geneva when the full translation arrived. She read it 3 times. She set it down. She looked out the window at the Alps. Then she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "They're giving us their garbage." The ship was 4.2 kilometers long. It was a Kaveth warship of a class that had been standard military issue across the Kaveth hegemony approximately 200 years ago. The Kaveth had 14 warship generations since then. This one, the Gaveth-class battlecruiser, had been obsolete since before anyone currently alive in the hegemony had been born. Its weapon systems were ancient. Its drives were primitive. Its armor, by Kaveth standards, was considered embarrassingly thin. By human standards, it was the most advanced piece of technology ever constructed. That was the joke. And the Kaveth knew it was the joke. The ship entered Earth orbit on a Thursday morning. It broadcast a second message, automated, clearly written by a bureaucrat, which informed humanity that the vessel was being transferred as a gesture of interstellar goodwill toward a developing species, that it was fully decommissioned and stripped of all sensitive systems, and that the Kaveth hegemony wished humanity productive learning from the study of its design. It also specified, with the precision of a bureaucracy that had been doing this for centuries, that this transfer constituted no treaty obligations, no protection guarantees, and no implied standing in hegemony affairs. In other words, here is our 200-year-old junk. Don't call us. The ship was covered in Kaveth disposal markings, bright orange stripes across the hull that, in Kaveth visual language, meant roughly what a bright orange sticker on a broken appliance means non-functional, for disassembly only. The Kaveth ambassador, not even the primary ambassador, but a third cultural liaison named Verith IV, who handled what the hegemony classified as developing species affairs, made one brief personal transmission to accompany the transfer. He was a tall, angular being with iridescent skin and the kind of practiced smile that people wear when they're trying not to laugh at something they find genuinely funny. He said in flawless English, because of course he spoke flawless English, they'd been listening for decades. "We hope this vessel serves as an educational resource. Perhaps in another few centuries, your species will understand what you are looking at." Then he closed the channel. The recording of that transmission was played at the subsequent emergency session of the United Earth Council. When it finished, the room was silent for 11 seconds. Those 11 seconds were later described by 17 different attendees in 17 different memoirs as the most important 11 seconds in human history. Because at the 12-second mark, Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of the Xenotech Integration Division, a 44-year-old aerospace engineer who had spent 20 years reverse engineering alien signals with no physical hardware to work from, said something that ended the silence. She said, "I want to board it." Secretary General Diallo looked at her. "They stripped it," Diallo said. "They said all sensitive systems have been removed." Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a person who has been told a safe is empty and knows how to crack a safe. "They stripped what they thought was sensitive," she said. "I'm interested in everything else." She paused. "Ambassador Verith IV said we might understand what we're looking at in another few centuries." She looked up at the display feed of the ship hanging in orbit. Massive, orange-striped, dismissed. "I'd like to prove him wrong in about 18 months. The first boarding party suited up at 0600 on a cold February morning at the Europa Station docking hub, from which a relay tether had been extended to the ship's primary airlock, a structure the size of a small office building, designed for Kaveth physiology, which meant it was 3 meters taller than any human being and twice as wide. Dr. Chen led the team personally. She had assembled 41 people, not bureaucrats, not military liaisons, not political observers, engineers, physicists, materials scientists, 3 xenolinguists for the interface systems, a metallurgist named Dr. Osei Bonsu, who had once written a paper arguing that Kaveth alloy composition implied manufacturing processes that shouldn't be thermodynamically possible, and who had spent the subsequent years being professionally mocked for it. She had found him on page 7 of a search for experts in Kaveth materials. She had called him at 2 a.m. He had answered on the first ring. "Pack a bag," she said. "You're going to find out if you were right." He was on a shuttle 4 hours later. The airlock opened without resistance. It had been left intentionally unsealed for human access. Another small condescension from the Kaveth, as if to say, "We're not even bothering to lock it." The boarding party stepped through into the primary corridor, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The ship was dark, emergency lighting only, a deep violet that matched Kaveth visual spectrum rather than human, which meant it lit everything at the edge of visibility and turned the corridors into something between a submarine and a cathedral. The corridors were vast, 8 meters wide, 6 meters tall, running in smooth curves that had no sharp corners anywhere. The walls were not metal in any conventional sense. They were a composite that, under the beam of Bonsu's analysis torch, returned spectral signatures that made him stop walking entirely. "This is the alloy," he said. His voice was very quiet. Chen stopped beside him. "The one from your paper?" "The one that shouldn't be possible, yes." He ran the torch over the wall again. "It's not just the alloy. Look at the grain structure. The molecular lattice it's actively organized. The material is semi-crystalline at ambient temperature, but the crystal lattice is oriented, deliberately oriented. It's not cast, it's not forged, it's grown under a magnetic field of a very specific configuration while being exposed to." He stopped. "Bonsu," Chen said. "Sorry." He took a breath. "This wall is smarter than anything we have ever built, and it is the floor, the ceiling, the structural frame, and the armor, simultaneously, because the lattice transitions function by function depending on which layer you're analyzing." He looked at Chen. "They gave us this because they thought it was worthless," he said. "This material alone is 50 years of metallurgical advancement. Just the wall." They were 4 meters into the ship. It got more interesting from there. The weapons bays were empty. The Kaveth had removed the actual weapon emitters. But the targeting architecture was still there. The fire control computers were still there. The targeting sensor arrays, passive systems the Kaveth apparently had not considered worth removing, were still there. Xenolinguist Priya Nair, kneeling in the targeting bay with an interface tablet and 3 years of Kaveth computational language on a hard drive, spent 40 minutes working through the system handshake protocols before she looked up and said with enormous calm, "I'm in the weapons computer." Chen crossed the bay in 12 steps. "The emitters are gone," Nair said, "but the targeting system, the tracking algorithms, the fire sequencing, the trajectory calculation across multiple simultaneous targets, it's all here, it's all intact. Because from the Kaveth perspective, without the emitters, none of this is a weapon." She looked at Chen. "But the brain of the gun is completely functional. They only took the barrel." The drive section was the find that ended all arguments about whether the project was worth funding. The Kaveth had removed the drive cores, the exotic matter reaction chambers that converted fuel to thrust. Those were presumably too advanced to leave in developing species' hands. But the drive architecture, the magnetic confinement channels, the thrust vectoring systems, the gravitational compensators that made Kaveth ships handle like fighters despite their mass, was not only intact, but was in better condition than the rest of the ship. The Kaveth had apparently cleaned and maintained the drive section as a matter of protocol, even during decommissioning. Dr. Jin-Woo Park, no relation to any Park, just the most common Korean surname and an unhelpful coincidence, was the team's propulsion physicist. He had written his PhD thesis on theoretical faster-than-light drive geometries based entirely on the mathematical implications of signals humanity had received from Kaveth ships passing through the outer system. He had never seen actual Kaveth hardware. He stood in the drive section for 6 minutes, without moving or speaking. Then he sat down on the deck because his legs stopped working correctly. "Dr. Park," someone said. "I was right," he said from the floor to no one. "About all of it. About the geometric compensation, the torsion field channeling. All of it. I was right about all of it." He looked up at the magnetic confinement channels running in their elegant curves above him. "We don't need to understand this from scratch," he said. "We just need drives that fit these channels. We can build drives that fit these channels. We could do that in less than a year if we started today." Dr. Chen looked at the drive section around her. She looked at the weapons computer. She looked at the wall that Bonsu was still quietly analyzing with an expression of academic rapture. She thought about Vareth Four's smile. She took out her personal communicator and called Secretary General Diallo. "I need a budget," she said. "Unlimited, or as close to it as the Council can authorize. I need it immediately. And I need you to keep what we've found here absolutely quiet for as long as possible." A pause on the line. "How long do you need?" Diallo asked. Chen looked at the ship around her, at all the things the Kaveth had not thought worth protecting. 18 months, she said. Maybe less. They named the project internally, never officially, never in any document that would be seen by anyone outside the team, Project Bastard. Because, as Dr. Bonsu put it during the second week, looking at the hybrid thing they were already building, that is absolutely what this is. The official name in the documentation submitted to the United Earth Council was the Xenotech Integration and Reactivation Initiative, or XERI. No one on the project ever called it that. They called it Bastard, with a kind of fond, fierce pride, the pride of people building something that had no right to work, out of pieces that had no business being combined, for a purpose that the original designers would have found incomprehensible. The ship was officially designated by the Council as the UES Prometheus. The team called her Bastard. She answered to both. The work was extraordinary and brutal, and the 18-month timeline Chen had promised was maintained through the kind of sustained creative overwork that burns people down to their essential elements and occasionally reveals that those elements are made of something harder than anyone expected. Week 3. Bonsu's materials team cracked the alloy growth process. Not fully, not the complete manufacturing protocol, but enough to produce panels of the composite in small quantities using modified magnetic confinement chambers originally designed for fusion research. The panels were impure, slightly irregular in their lattice structure, and approximately 40% less effective than the original Kaveth material. They were still 10 times stronger than anything humanity had previously manufactured. Month 2. Park's propulsion team built the first prototype drives, human-designed reaction chambers, built to fit the Kaveth confinement channels, running on deuterium-helium-3 fusion rather than the exotic matter the Kaveth used. The drives could not, by themselves, produce faster-than-light travel. But inserted into the Kaveth gravitational compensation architecture, they produced a thrust-to-mass ratio that, when Park ran the numbers the first time, caused him to run them again, then a third time, then show them to Chen without speaking, simply pointing. The ship would be, with these drives, approximately 8 times faster than any human vessel ever built. That was not the part that eventually made Vareth 4 regret his smile. That came later. Month 4. Nayer's weapons team made their breakthrough. The Kaveth targeting system's fire sequencing, designed for weapon emitters that no longer existed, was remapped painstakingly and brilliantly to a set of weapon systems that very much did exist. An array of 32 electromagnetic railgun batteries of human design, modified with Kaveth targeting software, firing tungsten iridium penetrators at 22 kilometers per second with accuracy that no human targeting computer had ever approached. Nayer called the result a Kaveth brain connected to human hands. The metaphor was apt. The railguns could track, target, calculate ballistic correction for relativistic drift, and fire across 12 simultaneous targets in the time it took a human operator to blink. Month 6 brought the incident that nearly ended the project. A Kaveth trade vessel, passing through the outer system on a routine commercial route, noticed the work being done in Earth orbit and filed an observation report with the hegemony. Within 3 weeks, a formal communication arrived from the Hegemony Office of Developing Species Affairs, the same bureaucratic desk that Vareth 4 worked for, which expressed, in the polished and absolutely devastating language of entities who had been writing diplomatic insults for 3,000 years, concern that Earth's modification of the decommissioned vessel may exceed the technical capacity implied by the transfer conditions, and noting that the hegemony retains the right to review any reactivation of disposed military assets. In other words, we're watching and we're already a little worried, and we want you to know we can stop this. Secretary General Diallo brought the message to Chen personally. Chen read it, set it down, thought for a moment. "How long," she said, "before the hegemony could physically get a ship here if they decided to intervene?" "Minimum 3 months, likely 6, Diallo said. Chen did the math. "Then we have a deadline." She looked at her team's current projections. "We accelerate. Everything non-essential gets cut. We focus on weapons, drives, and the one system that makes all of this mean something." "Which system?" Diallo asked. Chen had been sitting on this for 4 months, waiting until the other systems were far enough along to make it worth discussing. She had run the numbers 60 times. She had consulted with Bonsu, with Park, with Nair. She had not yet told anyone else. She told Diallo now. The Secretary General listened. When Chen finished, Diallo was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Is it possible?" "Everything about this project," Chen said, "has been possible. We just needed the right framework to build inside." She pulled up the schematics on the display. The Kaveth stripped the ship because they thought the emitters, the drive cores, the sensitive systems were all that mattered. They left the architecture, the skeleton, the nervous system. She traced a line through the schematic. "What they left behind is a body. We've given it muscles and reflexes. What I've been working on for 4 months is the thing that makes it a predator." The system she showed Diallo had no human precedent, but it had a Kaveth one. It was present in the ship's original design, stripped down to its structural elements, never intended for reactivation. A suite of passive sensor systems originally designed to give the Gaveth-class battlecruiser complete spatial awareness across a 200,000-kilometer sphere. Every object, every energy signature, every gravitational anomaly, processed in real time. The Kaveth had used it for navigation and threat avoidance. Chen's team had spent 4 months figuring out how to connect it to the targeting system. "Complete spatial awareness," she said, feeding directly into 12-target simultaneous engagement protocols, with drives fast enough to be at any point in that 200,000-kilometer sphere in under 4 minutes. She looked at Diallo. "The Kaveth built a ship that could see everything and run from everything. We've built a ship that can see everything and kill everything." "In their 200-year-old junk," Diallo said slowly. "In their 200-year-old junk." Chen allowed herself one small smile. "They threw away their knife. We made it a sword." The Kaveth did not send one ship. That would have been a statement, but a modest one. The hegemony, when it decided to make a point, made the point with the kind of overwhelming scale that had kept 300 species from disagreeing with them for 900 years. They sent 7. 7 Kaveth warships of a current generation class entered the solar system on a Thursday, 14 months after the charitable transfer, broadcasting on every frequency a message that the Interstellar Affairs Bureau translated in under 60 seconds because it was written to be translated quickly. The Kaveth hegemony hereby invokes Article 7 of the Galactic Salvage and Disposal Conventions, under which the modification of disposed military assets beyond the technology classification level of the receiving species constitutes unauthorized rearmament. The vessel designated Charitable Transfer Reference 4471 Earth is to be immediately surrendered to hegemony custody, or it will be disabled and reclaimed by force. Humanity is given 48 hours to comply. Non-compliance will be considered an act of aggression against the hegemony. 7 ships. Humanity had no fleet that could fight 7 current-generation Kaveth warships. The math was not close. In raw capability, 7 Kaveth ships represented approximately the firepower of humanity's entire active military space fleet, twice over. Ambassador Verath IV accompanied the fleet personally. He made a separate transmission, directly to Secretary General Diallo, in the same warm tone one uses with a child who has been caught doing something they knew was wrong, but was also secretly slightly impressive. Secretary General, I must confess we underestimated your engineers. Whatever you've managed to do with that old hull is clearly beyond what we anticipated. A credit to your species genuinely, but I think you understand our position. We cannot allow a developing species to possess military hardware beyond their classification level. Return the vessel, and this matter is settled peacefully. You have my personal guarantee of no further consequence. He was very convincing. He was also, and this was the part that mattered, making an assumption that had been made about humanity many times before, by many species, in many contexts. He assumed they were afraid. Secretary General Diallo's response was recorded, and later became one of the most replayed transmissions in human history. She was standing at her desk in Geneva, looking at the feed of 7 Kaveth warships hanging in the outer system, and her voice was perfectly level. Ambassador Verath IV, thank you for your concern. We would like to respectfully point out that the charitable transfer conditions specified no restrictions on modification, that Article 7 of the Salvage Conventions applies only to vessels modified with technology provided by the hegemony, which ours was not, and that the UES Prometheus is a human vessel, built by human engineers using human design systems aboard a frame that is legally our property. A pause. We will not be returning her. She closed the channel. Verath IV's response arrived 11 minutes later. The warmth was gone. You have 47 hours and 49 minutes. In the U.S. Prometheus, currently holding position in high Earth orbit, Dr. Chen was not in the command center. She was in the engineering bay, running final calibration checks on the spatial awareness array, when Captain Tomas Reyes, the most experienced combat commander in the United Earth Navy, a man who had fought in 3 belt conflicts and one brief, ugly engagement with a Tereth pirate operation near Jupiter, found her. Reyes was 53. He had a face that had been broken and healed at least twice and had given up being symmetrical about it. He had been given command of the Prometheus 6 weeks ago, when Chen had finally declared the ship operationally ready for crew boarding. He had spent those 6 weeks learning everything about the ship. He was, Chen had concluded, exactly the right human being to fly it into a fight. 47 hours, he said. I know, she said without looking up. The council is meeting. There are significant voices in favor of compliance. I know that too. Chen. He waited until she looked up. Are we ready? She had been running simulations for 4 months, 212 combat simulations against Kaveth ship specifications reconstructed from every piece of data humanity had gathered over 60 years. She had made the simulations harder each time, adjusting for variables she was uncertain about, assuming the worst-case Kaveth tactical response at every decision point. The Prometheus had won 194 of them. The 18 losses had taught her things. She had fixed 12 of the underlying causes. 6 remained as genuine uncertainty, things she could not fully account for because she did not have complete Kaveth capability data. She looked at Reyes. 7 ships is more than I planned for, she said. I planned for 5 as the worst case. 7 changes the spatial engagement geometry. Can we win? A long pause. We can win against 5 without serious question, she said. 6 is very possible. 7. She set down her calibration tool. 7 requires us to use the ship the way it was never designed to be used. Aggressive geometry, close engagement, using the speed to stay inside their targeting solutions while the spatial array keeps us outside theirs. Can the crew handle that? The crew is exceptional. She met his eyes. The question is whether I've built a ship good enough for exceptional people to win in. Reyes considered that. 7 ships, he said. They sent 7 because they expected us to have one. Yes. He almost smiled. Then they're already wrong about us. He turned to go, then stopped. For what it's worth, he said, I've read everything you've built into this ship. The targeting integration, the spatial awareness system, the drive modification. He looked back at her. They threw away a knife. You built a nightmare. Whatever happens out there, and you should know that. Chen watched him leave. She went back to her calibrations. She had 39 hours left. The 48-hour deadline expired at 400 on a Saturday. At 0401, the 7 Kaveth warships began moving toward Earth. At 0403, the UES Prometheus moved to intercept. One ship, 4.2 kilometers of rebuilt, reborn, 200-year-old hull, carrying the weapons of one species and the nervous system of another, crewed by 340 human beings, who had each been selected by Captain Reyes through a process almost as brutal as Chen's engineering team selection. Anyone who needed reassurance that this was survivable was not on the ship. The crew of the Prometheus knew exactly what they were flying into. They had been told the true odds. They had been given the opportunity to disembark. Not one of them had taken it. Weapons Officer Lieutenant Commander Yemi Adeyemi was at the targeting station when the Kaveth ships came into resolution range. She had worked with Nair on the weapons integration for 8 months. She knew the targeting system's capabilities better than any other human alive. She ran the spatial array handshake, confirmed all 32 railgun batteries hot, and watched the beautiful, alien logic of the Kaveth targeting architecture light up with 7 new contacts. The targeting system identified them, classified them, calculated optimal engagement geometry for each, and presented her with a firing solution in under 3 seconds. She had never seen anything do that before. "Targets acquired," she said, and her voice was steady. "All 7. Firing solutions computed." The Kaveth opened with a ranging shot, a standard hegemony engagement protocol for dealing with vessels of inferior classification. A single directed energy pulse, fired at the Prometheus's primary hull, calibrated to be just powerful enough to disable rather than destroy. The spatial awareness array detected it 0.3 seconds before impact. Reyes had built the response protocol himself, working with Chen. The moment the array detected an incoming weapon, the drives fired a micro-correction burn. Small, precise, just enough to move the hull out of the impact path by 30 meters. The pulse missed. On the 7 Kaveth ships, there was a pause of approximately 4 seconds, the Kaveth equivalent of blinking in confusion. A ranging shot at that distance, fired at a stationary target, did not miss. The Prometheus was no longer stationary. Reyes hit the drives at full output. What happened to a crew at full output from modified human drives inside Kaveth gravitational compensation architecture was that they felt approximately 2G of acceleration, uncomfortable but survivable, while the ship outside moved at a rate that made the Kaveth sensor operators reach for their consoles to check for system errors. The Prometheus crossed 40,000 kilometers in 94 seconds. She came out of the burn inside the Kaveth formation, not at the edge of it, not approaching it from a safe distance. Inside it, 200 kilometers from the nearest Kaveth vessel, well within the minimum engagement range where the Kaveth ship's large-scale weapon systems could not track and fire without risk of hitting each other. Adeyemi fired. The Kaveth targeting doctrine assumed that a vessel inside minimum engagement range was attempting to flee or surrender. No species, in 900 years of Kaveth military history, had ever voluntarily driven inside a fleet formation to fight. The 32 railgun batteries, guided by targeting software that could solve 12 simultaneous firing solutions in a blink, began methodically destroying things. Not killing, not yet. Chen had spent considerable thought on what to shoot first. The answer, which Park had helped her derive from the drive architecture data, was the gravitational compensators. Every Kaveth ship's compensators were external, visible, accessible, essential. Without them, a Kaveth warship could not maneuver at engagement speed without killing its own crew through inertial forces. The Prometheus hit compensators on 4 of the 7 ships in the first 90 seconds. 4 Kaveth ships, suddenly unable to maneuver at engagement velocity, dropped to sub-combat speeds. The other 3 turned to engage. What followed was 11 minutes of combat that human military historians would later spend years trying to fully document, because the Prometheus's own sensor records, taken by the Spatial Awareness System, which logged everything within 200,000 kilometers, showed a ship moving in ways that seemed to violate the tactical logic of everything that had come before it. Reyes used the speed the way a knife fighter uses reach, never still, never where the enemy expected. The Spatial Awareness Array fed continuous positional data to his helm, and he used it not to avoid, though he avoided, but to select. To choose at every moment which angle, which closing vector, which moment of approach gave Adeyemi the shot she needed, while keeping the hull outside the firing solutions of the ships that still had weapons. The Kaveth were not incapable fighters. They had 900 years of doctrine, and 3 of the 7 ships were still fully mobile. But their doctrine was built on the assumption of superiority, of a capability gap that meant they could dictate engagement terms. They had never developed the tactical patterns needed for fighting an enemy that was faster, that knew where they were before they fired, and that had driven into the middle of their formation on purpose. Ship 5 went dark when Adeyemi put 3 penetrators through its reactor housing at 22 kilometers per second. Ship 6 lost its entire weapons array when the Prometheus executed a burn that put it directly below the Kaveth vessel at 800 kilometers, inside its own weapons depression angle, and Adeyemi fired upward. Ship 7, the last mobile Kaveth vessel, made a decision that none of the others had made. It broke formation. It turned away from Earth, away from the fight, and began accelerating toward the outer system. Running. Reyes tracked it on the spatial array for 40 seconds. He looked at Adeyemi. She met his eyes. A question without words. He shook his head once. "Let it go," he said. "Let it go home and tell them what happened here." The ship ran. Behind it, 6 Kaveth warships drifted, disabled, contained, crew alive and unhurt. The Prometheus held position between them and Earth, 32 railguns warm and ready. The battle had lasted 11 minutes and 40 seconds. The Prometheus had not been hit once. In the engineering bay, where she had been watching every system readout in real time, Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palms against a section of wall, the original Kaveth composite, grown under magnetic fields and manufacturing processes that shouldn't be thermodynamically possible, and let herself feel for one moment everything she had held back for 18 months, grief for the nights she had not slept, for the people she had driven to their limits, for the weight of being the one who had to believe when no one else had grounds to. And underneath that, deep and fierce and permanent, something else entirely. Pride. Ambassador Vareth IV's transmission arrived 17 hours after the battle. It was not addressed to the Secretary General. It was addressed to Dr. Sarah Chen. The transmission was 4 minutes long. Vareth IV did not speak for the first 40 seconds of it, which was, for someone who had spent a career in diplomatic communication, an extraordinary thing. When he did speak, the polished warmth was entirely gone. What replaced it was something more honest. The careful, precise tone of a person recalibrating everything they thought they knew. He said, "I owe you an apology, not on behalf of the hegemony. That will come through official channels, and I expect it will be worded very carefully by people more cautious than me. This is personal." Another pause. "I made an assumption about your species that I have made about many species, and I have never been wrong before. I assumed that what you did not yet understand you could not yet use. That was incorrect. I also assumed—" He stopped, started again. "I also assumed that a species in your position would be afraid. That fear of us would be the primary factor in every decision you made. That was also incorrect." He looked directly into the transmission feed. "What you did, what you built, is not what a afraid species does. I am trying to find the right word in your language. I believe the word is audacious." He closed the channel. The official hegemony diplomatic communication came 3 days later, in the form of a 40-page formal document that acknowledged, with the pained precision of an institution not accustomed to being wrong, that the modifications to the vessel were within the legal scope of the transfer conditions, that the engagement had been defensive in nature, given the explicit hegemony threat, and that the Kaveth hegemony was prepared to open formal diplomatic discussions regarding humanity's reclassification from developing species to emerging civilizational entity. Emerging civilizational entity. It was, in hegemony classification terms, 1 tier below full galactic standing. Humanity had jumped 3 tiers in 18 months. Secretary General Diallo read the document in full. Then she called Chen. "They want to reclassify us," she said, "and they want their ships back." The ships are fine, Chen said. The crews are unharmed. They can have them. And the reclassification? Accept it, Chen said immediately, but ask for something in return. What? A pause. Trade rights, Chen said. Full access to hegemony material science archives, specifically the manufacturing protocols for the alloy composite. She let that sit for a moment. We cracked 40% of it ourselves in 18 months with one ship's worth of material to work from. With the full protocols, we'll have it completely in 6 months. They know that. Offer to accept their reclassification graciously in exchange for the archives, and they save face while we get what we actually want. Diallo was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about the next 18 months already. I've been thinking about the next 18 months since month 2 of the first 18 months, Chen said. The hegemony accepted the trade. The UES Prometheus was formally recommissioned at a ceremony attended by 300 dignitaries and broadcast live to 9 billion people. The orange disposal stripes had been repainted over. Chen had done it herself, with a brush, in the week after the battle, which was the most purely satisfying thing she had ever done. The hull now bore the blue and gold of the United Earth Navy, and below the registry number, in letters large enough to be read from a following ship, UES Prometheus, built by human hands, from what others discarded. At the ceremony, Captain Reyes was asked by a reporter what it had felt like to take a 200-year-old decommissioned alien hulk into a fight against 7 active Caveth warships. He thought about it for a moment. Like bringing a knife to a gunfight, he said, and discovering that whoever made the knife knew something the gun never did. He looked at Dr. Chen, who was standing across the dock with a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other, already reviewing the first delivery from the hegemony material archives. She made it a sword, he said. It was her knife. I just had the good sense to fly it. Somewhere across the hegemony, in systems that humanity had not yet visited and would spend the next 50 years beginning to reach, the story of the battle spread the way stories spread in any civilization. Imperfectly, with details changed and details added, acquiring weight as it traveled, but the core of it, the part that did not change, the part that arrived intact at every retelling. Humanity was given their enemies' garbage,